and do this whole program. I'm very grateful to my three colleagues who have agreed to be on the webinar this evening. And, we look forward to listening to their stories. And my role is just simply to say thank you very much for doing this. And now I'm going to be quiet, and I'm going to be, behind the scenes listening to all of you. So thank you very much. And I'm now going to. And so Manjula, please take over. And I'm going to now be in the background. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone here. We welcome you to the fourth episode of our series, which is on the book Leaders in the Making, if you see this. And we are very, very fortunate to have three very important contributors who are from the industry, who have put in their life into the field of HR and brought their experiences to us today in the form of this webinar. We've been listening to three earlier sessions, which were very, very interesting, very enjoyable, and very fruitful. And we look forward to this also, where we have our esteemed panel, as you see on the screen, Mr. R.R. Nair, Mr. Sridhar Ganesh, and Mr. Shrikant Gattu. And of course, none other than our own mentor and our founder and our chairperson, Mr. Anil Sachdevji. And we have with us some very smart girls who have been working as the industry person, who is our alumna, Ms. Kashika, and our young students from Soil SOBD, Aradhya and Anshika. They are going to help us conduct this entire webinar in a very smooth way. So I would start with Kashika to take it further. Prior to this, I just would like to add one sentence which could look very, very basic to all my esteemed panelists. And that is that HR, I would say, is the backbone of any healthy setup. And this is something which I always thought about as the most important part of why HR as a division is so important for a successful organization. So we do not have to reiterate this by saying these things, but we will listen to their experiences and understand how HR has played a very important role in the growth of those companies where they have contributed their heart, soul, and time. So over to you, Kashika.
Thank you, ma'am. Hello, everyone. I welcome all the dear leaders. It is a pleasure for me to be back on the wonderful platform with amazing HR leaders like you. Once again, welcome here. My first question would be to R.R. Nair, sir. Human resources being a vast subject, what encouraged you to take learning and development as a core area of expertise? And what inspired you to become an executive coach and a trainer to multiple CEOs and CXOs?
Thank you, Kashika, for this very engaging question. And not before I acknowledge my gratefulness to my friend Anil, because in a way, this is Soil on Soil, School of Inspired Leadership on Stories of Inspired Leadership. So I'm also privileged for the opportunity I received from both Arvind and TV, and therefore I would express my humble gratitude to them for involving me, engaging me in the conversation. So that's part of the stories which you see in this book. Well, I think if I were to really look at what sort of things that influenced my life, it's my early education and my field of interest in psychology, which was very wonderfully nurtured and supported by my professors. And therefore, and also a family environment which in fact encouraged me to choose subjects of interest, and they didn't actually enforce what I should actually be reading and doing. So to that extent, I think I'm grateful to my family. I'm grateful to my parents in particular. I'm grateful to my professors. And therefore, I chose a discipline which is all about people. And I really started enjoying. And I seem to have done reasonably well. And therefore, the natural propensity for me was to really pursue my interest in psychology. And there were two options. One, to move into the space of clinical and mental health domain. And the other, of course, was to work in industry. So a set of circumstances took me to a company called DCM in Delhi. And that, in fact, triggered so much of interest in me, both in terms of attracting talent, developing talent, and retaining talent. I spent about 4 or 5 years with DCM before I moved to a company which truly believed in people and human resources as an asset. And that happens to be Hindustan Lever, and now, of course, known as Hindustan Unilever. And therefore, my first formative years have been mostly in the domain of learning and development. And of course, I got engaged in spotting talent from campuses in particular. And that was actually the journey that I went through. So throughout this period, I think what has really fascinated about the people function is that this is really core and the central to any business. And if there is a supportive, enabling culture which promotes meritocracy, which promotes, say, a culture of high performance, which in fact supports people to grow from within and thereby create a learning and development climate for the organization to support business to flourish, develop, and contribute. That, I think, is probably the best sort of canvas or a playground for someone with my educational background. And that is what I enjoyed immensely in the course of my life in DCM and subsequently with Hindustan Lever, and now known as Hindustan Unilever. So I think it is a whole set of these circumstances which enabled me to function in different roles. In the course of my career with Hindustan Unilever, I worked in almost over a dozen different roles. And one tremendous advantage I had was that I could actually spring out from learning and development into performance management, into career development and succession management, into leadership development. And one of the fundamental, and I consider it as one of the critical exposure that I had was working in factories with blue-collared employees. And therefore, industrial relations assumed an important pillar of my overall professional experience. And I'm sure that we will have opportunity to talk about some of those later. But finally, when it comes to the other part of the question, what sort of made me interested in coaching? I think early on, as a young manager in Hindustan Unilever, when I went to Unilever Management Training Center in the UK, I had an exposure to John Whitmore. And I'm sure that all of you know about John Whitmore, the one who really focused on performance coaching in the 70s. And he was the one who developed the GROW model of coaching. And I had the immense pleasure, along with my co-participants, spending almost about half a day in a golf course and fundamentally teaching how do you set a goal, what sort of choices and options that you have. But before that, you have to look at where are you now, which is the current reality, and what are the way forwards that you can consider by using golf as a sport to help us to conceptualize the GROW model. Of course, people felt that I had a certain type of coaching mindset, and that is attributable to my experience with DCM and early experience in talent management and talent development. But subsequently, I was also hugely impacted by some of my senior members in Hindustan Unilever who played the role of a playing coach, someone who was doing a job and still using a coaching style as part of that person's leadership repertoire. So I got really interested and fascinated about truly discovering the potential of people through the power of questions, through the power of asking questions, through the power of nurturing, challenging, and supporting. So later part of my career, when I moved to a role of being a coach, in fact, I was invited out to support a lot of young leaders who went on to become board members in Unilever companies. And therefore, the task was one of helping them to succeed in their role. A challenge I experienced at that point of time was that a lot of people moved from a head of a function to that of a CXO role. And the difference between a CXO role and an HOD role, classic HOD role, was one of having to learn how to use dual hat, the functional hat and also the organizational hat. And in that process, transitioning into a CXO role, and in some cases from CXO role to that of a CEO role, I got really a great deal of exposure and experience. And that, post my long innings with Hindustan Unilever, I was able to flourish, and this time not only in FMCG sector, but in a whole variety of industries. And that is what I have been engaged with in the course of last 15, 18 years. So I think in sum, coaching is one of the most customized developmental initiatives the world can offer. And secondly, you also get to sense the direct impact of the coaching endeavor, both in terms of leadership skills and also in terms of business outcome. This in sum is my sort of story, which is actually giving you a glimpse of my interest in learning and development, how it got flourished into the whole gamut of human resource development, thanks to companies like DCM and of course, Hindustan Unilever, and then how I graduated into coaching, which is currently one of my major preoccupations.
Thank you, sir. I really believe that being in L&D is such a glamorous role to perform towards the organization. As rightly said by you, attracting talent, retaining talent, and also developing talent. And then, taking an employee from X level to another level is absolutely a great experience for any individual. Thank you so much. Over to you, Anshika.
Thank you, Kashika. So my question is for Sridhar Ganesh, sir. Sir, my question is like at a very young age, you were given the responsibility of handling the IR department. I think you were at the age of 23 only. So what were the major challenges that you faced in working in the IR department and how did you deal with that?
Thank you, Anshika. It's a long time ago when I was 23.
Yes, sir.
So you brought back those memories to me. Thank you so much. I think when I started, I worked for a couple of companies, or actually 3 companies in Calcutta, and in the mid 70s, Calcutta was the place for industrial relations or employee relations or union management relations. RR is well aware of what I'm talking about. He was partly in that scenario with one of the subsidiaries of Hindustan Unilever at that time in Lipton's. And so I started off with a company called GKW, and then I went to Metal Box. They both don't exist today, but that immediately one should not come to the conclusion that I'm responsible. I was far too low in the hierarchy to take such calls. All right. So therefore, no fault of mine, if I may say so. So I think to answer your question, I think I would say it in 2 parts. I think at a transactional sort of a level, I think the challenges continue, I think, to a large extent in terms of both the numerator as well as the denominator. What do I mean by that? I think the numerator, as you would have studied, is the productivity and the outcome that you get, and the denominator is the cost. So this has been a constant struggle in terms of what is the equation, what is the balance, how do we get more of it? And this I have done for almost 20 plus years of my life, because moving away from GKW, I went to Metal Box, frying pan to the fire, and then I went to Berger Paints, which was not too bad, but then I went to Cadbury's, where my first job was to do some downsizing. So this has been constantly the challenge. But if one goes, I think, to build on this in terms of beyond the transaction, my experience, and this could well be personal, is I think there is a fundamental mindset issue in terms of this challenge. The mindset of we, they, I think has largely dominated this scenario over time. saying blue collar versus non-blue collar, etc., etc. Our inability to deal with this as a set of human beings and build trust, which is so fundamental in when you manage a large enterprise, I think was missing, if I may say so. Our ability to be transparent, open, and communicate what was required for their understanding and ownership and accountability was also missing. So there are a lot of these filters that we used to operate from, and thereby create some of these challenges for ourselves. So I think those are all challenges that I faced because it came down the line in terms of shop floor management, in terms of whether you talk in terms of productivity, whether you talk in terms of attendance, discipline, and things like that. So I think those are, in my view, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but those were the real challenges that I have come across up to a fairly midpoint in terms of my career. And I think Anil was involved in this exercise himself, along with another colleague of his, for Cadbury's, and building a level of trust in one of our factories in Thane. And that worked well. I think we got some breakthroughs, and we decided to share all the information that we could, which were relevant and useful. And I think it built a climate of one of mutual trust and respect. So that's, I think, the big challenge in terms of the IR arena that I came across.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing all your insights of your experience. And I think it would be helpful for all of us to know how IR department basically deals with and what challenges maybe we could face if we try to develop ourselves in the same future.
But just one correction. I don't think there's something
So
called
now
IR
I would
department.
like to pass it on to Aradhana.
I'm sorry,
Right.
sorry, but I think it's every line manager's responsibility to manage,
Sir, you're not
manage
audible.
relationships. Sorry, I think you passed on the baton.
So you can continue. You were saying.
No, I was saying, I think Anshika was trying to say that IR department, I was trying to broad base that to say, I think managing employee relations is not just HR, I think it's line manager.
Yes.
And I think that's where the challenge for HR lies in terms of how do we broad base this and take this forward across as a management team.
Okay. I guess she's facing some network issues, but okay.
Sorry, sir, I was facing some network issue. Can you please repeat it?
Again?
Sorry, sir, I could not hear you. Sorry.
No, I was just saying it, instead of calling it an IR issue, I think we should call it a management sort of a challenge and see how every manager responds to this in a manner which is helpful, meaningful, and builds on relationships.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Anshika. So now my question is for Shrikant, sir. That sir, that you have been in a large public sector organization for past like 30 years and more than 30 years since your graduation. So how would you describe your journey till you reach the head of HR head?
Okay, it's a very vast question.
Yes.
But first and foremost, let me thank few people. Just take less than a minute. Dr. Agarwal, Dr. TV Rao, both these people sort of reached out to me. I have tried to live as much below the visibility as I could right through my profession, because I somehow believed that let the work do the talking. But somehow they tracked me down and got me in this August list of 30 illustrious leaders. And amongst them, each of them has at least 40 years of experience. So if you put it together, it is 1,200 years of experience, which is sitting in that book in terms of width. And the 40 odd years is just about 3% of that. So I'm a very, I feel really overawed by the presence of all these, illustrious people. And even while listening to the other two, I felt as if they should keep on talking so that I got to listen to them more than my talking myself. I came from a Fauji background in the sense that my father was in Indian Air Force and saw action in every single war this country has seen from Second World War till 1971, and moved through several locations. And through 11 years of schooling, I've seen almost 10 schools, and right from under the tree to the best of schools. So this background sort of pushed me into a situation where I had to quickly get into any new place, uh, get to understand what is to be done, develop friends, develop relationships, and so on. So this is something which and kept on getting very much influenced by the teachers as well as other people who are with me. PSU was a conscious choice, and I must say that because in 70s when I started my career, somehow it appeared that if I had to, and I may be completely wrong, that if I had to really remain professionally true to myself, as well as to be able to rise on the basis of merit, maybe that is a place. I don't have to have a surname which sort of, ensures that I grow. I don't have to have anything else, and which I agree, in retrospect, is not really the right thing to think about. But then it took me through three different public sector undertakings. BHEL, which was more of like a conglomerate of companies, because it was created by putting together independent organizations which were existing in different parts of the country under a very illustrious leader that time, Mr. V. Krishnamurthy, he was a well-known personality, and he really created impact not only in BHEL but also in Maruti as well as in Steel Authority. Then I went on to join a sort of almost a startup. In those days was NTPC. Today it's a huge organization, but those days it was just about 500 to 1,000 odd people. And it was such a great learning experience. And one of my seniors, Mr. K.K. Sinha, is also one of the leaders who is covered in this book. And it was a phenomenal experience to go into absolutely remotest part of the country, acquiring land, taking people into confidence, putting up a power plant. And the idea was that all the power plants, instead of taking coal to various parts of the country, you should put power plants at coal pit heads and from there transmit the power. And that was the idea on which NTPC was developed. So it was a absolutely greenfield starting PSU. Then I went on to Bharat Petroleum, which was a multinational which was nationalized. And when I joined, it was a company where people were still not out of the shock of nationalization. So Bauma Shell was a big brand in those days, and it almost controlled 65 to 70% of the market share. And from there to becoming a public sector undertaking, and transition was not still over. And there was a fond hope many people had that one day it will again become a multinational, which obviously did not happen. But actually, in retrospect, it gave a lot of growth to the company. And it is today the organization has just completed 47 years of foundation, and it is very different from what it used to be in the earlier days. And I must take a moment to acknowledge the contribution of Sri Anil Sachdeva in this organization, because he was in the committee which recommended merger of Kochi refinery with Bharat Petroleum. And Anilji, your work ensured that Kerala gets an investment of 25,000 crores, which was more than the cumulative investment it got from anybody from independence till the year when we made this investment. It would have never happened. People had got growth, which they never thought of. People became board members from Kochi refinery, which in other, normal times, it would not have been possible because it was more of a regional player, and so on. So all these things are the organizational background. I, from beginning, understood that my interest is in the people space, and everything that had anything to do with people, whether it was running literary associations, running student unions, or for that matter, anything which involved that, other than doing chartered accountancy or accounting function. And I don't know for what reason, somehow it was more interesting for me. And then I chose HR as a conscious choice. And I must say that we'll talk about the challenges, but in two lines, if I had to capture, whilst I joined the HR function, I was made to go through various roles, including head of a business unit. ERP and SAP implementation, head of IT function. When I started my career, if you would have told me that, look, I would have been heading an IT function or something like this, or heading a business, even when my wildest dream, I would not have thought it was possible. But people believed in me. The organizations kept on giving responsibilities, and with God's grace, those things got done. So this has been the journey. And just since we are talking about public sector, I must share with you that they offer phenomenal career opportunities. And some of you should definitely consider that as an option.
Sure, sir. Thank you. So I just want to say that you have always been with the people person. And there was this saying in the book which I read about you. And it was about that your always interest was in solving the genuine problem of the people and showing the genuine interest in that. And you patiently listen and guided the people in their best interest form. And I believe that that is the most that HRs are asked for. So thank you, sir. Now I would like to pass on to Kashika to carry forward.
Sure. So my next question would be to all the three leaders, but I would invite Mr. R.R. Nair to go ahead with this first. The question is, what are some of the characteristics that you think are super essential and non-negotiable for an HR leader to possess in today's world?
Wonderful, wonderful question, Karshika, and I'm sure we will have very interesting responses from all the three of us. Starting with the fact that knowing is only one part of a profession. Doing and practicing is the second dimension. And particularly in the context of human resource function, being and becoming would be even more important, probably building on both knowing and doing. So from that perspective, from that angle, I would just call out a few which seem to have helped my journey and my career. First and foremost is trust and trustworthiness. How much I trust others and do others trust me? Being trustworthy and truthful, to my mind, is very, very important, essential, non-negotiable attribute of a good professional in human resource function. Obviously, integrity, honesty, all of that are important. But let me call out another important one, which is the need to continuously remain relevant now and in the future. And therefore, more than any other time, we realized during COVID time, and as we look ahead in the future, how do you inculcate and how do you nurture and develop one's learning agility? The future of work, the future of workforce, the future of workplace. And I'm sure that there are lots of these topics which are out in the air, and we have all certain perspectives and outlook on each of these topics. But how do we remain relevant in a dynamic world? And therefore, learning agility, I would attach a lot of importance. Adversity, and how do we cope with adversity? Some live experiences that I went through going back in time, when Hindustan Lever's 60% of production and profit came from the largest factory in Mumbai. And someone who was at that point of time an extremely indisciplined, tough, and using pressure tactics, came into our factory as the leader of the union. And for almost about a year, we had to go through a real challenging situation of having to live with a massive go-slow. Fortunately, we had another factory, and the second largest factory in Calcutta, which actually made good of the shortfall to the extent it was possible. But the point I am trying to say is that there are moments when you actually have adversarial relations with your own union and an outside trade union leader whose interest is not the company and the factory and the future of our workmen, but more in terms of what is it that he wants to gain out of his trade union leadership role. So in such situation, tenacity, perseverance, the ability to carry the whole team, because morale and motivation of the line management and supervisors are very critical when you actually go through a prolonged conflict. So I would really sort of say that even the fact that COVID has actually sort of created so much of discontinuity in the way that we worked, remote working, working out of home, working out of anywhere, you look at the scenarios that we are seeing, disruption is going to be the order of the day. Whether it is business model, whether it is hiring practices, or whether the nature of work itself will undergo dramatic transformation. So under all these set of circumstances, our ability not only to become agile in terms of our learnability, but also our ability to manage adversities and challenges, I think is very crucial from a human resource perspective. Empathy and respect both have assumed greater significance as an important attribute. And from my own perspective, we all have heard about servant leadership. A service-oriented outlook and mindset is very crucial for someone who plays the role of someone who provides healing touch in difficult set of circumstances for employees and organizational life. It becomes very important for people who are in this profession to exhibit an abundant measure of empathy. And the last one is all about our capacity to reflect. Most of us have a tendency to react. The difference between reacting and responding is that in responding, we reflect and then we respond thoughtfully. And I think from a human resource perspective, this profession requires people who have the capacity to reflect and respond. Finally, let me just sum up by saying probably another attribute. We all talk about organizations are driven by purpose. I think equally important for human resource professional also to introspect and really identify what is the core purpose and meaning that they attach to their profession, and what is their inner call as to what are the internal driving forces which is propelling them to perform a very difficult, both nice and also tough situations that HR professionals have to handle. And that in fact becomes an internal driving force for success. So let me just say these 4 or 5 critical attributes would become very relevant now and more so in the future.
True, sir. I really second your thought on learning agility, trustworthiness, and integrity that a leader should show, and especially an HR leader when he has to run the whole business in people's perspective. Over to you, Ganesh, sir. What are your thoughts on it?
I was thinking I'll change the order and ask Srikant to go.
Sure. Srikant, sir?
Yeah. The first and foremost is that I understood the taste of HR when I went out of HR. What is it that it is dishing out to others? And I, with respectfully, I'll say I didn't like the taste of what was being dished out. And I therefore started understanding as to what is it that really the business is looking for from an HR perspective. And I have been head of 5 different businesses stroke entities before I got back to HR to really understand what exactly is needed to be done. The first and foremost change which I found in myself and also I pursued was that, look, anything that does not make sense to the business, just don't do it. Because end of the day, it's a business organization. Yes, we need to have many other things, and I will speak about them a little later. But we must make sense to the business. We are business people. Somehow this thinking that, look, HR is HR and business is, I think, the most stupid idea ever anybody has thought of. HR is business. and business is HR, as some time back, Sridharji spoke about. The one big change which used to happen every year is that by 7th of January, a team was formed out of a vertical set of people from senior to the absolutely junior most people in the team, because incidentally young people bring a lot of new ideas, and anything one wants to achieve, you must have a, a good number of young people as a part of that. They would go and meet all business heads, all entity heads, location heads, territory heads, actually operating people who are interacting with the customers. What is it that is their agenda for the year and maybe next 2 to 3 years more? So, because it doesn't make sense to talk about what is HR agenda. What is it that they want to do? They are what are they engaged with? Because that's what is they are passionate about. Understand that, and having understood it deeply, spend another month to collate these different ideas and do a whole lot of brainstorming and come out with some themes that one needs to work on. And by the end of 3 months, that is again the date was fixed 7th April, the next year's business plan for HR was made, which was nothing but something which was completely based out of what was heard by people, what was demanded by people. And I must share one more thing. One cannot say and expect them, look, they will tell you exactly in the language. We have to decipher what are the underlying things which are below. So that is one part. And let me take this opportunity to mention every HR person, if whether you are in HR role, you must take a P&L responsibility. Anilji has set up so many successful ventures, and you can see from his own experience and how he has really, you cannot be in HR unless you understand the business side of the organization. So this is one. To me, this is non-negotiable. Okay, this is the one dimension which is there. Second thing, which I think, again, I am getting into a completely opposite side of that, is anchoring in life. And anchoring in life is something, what worked for me is, I'll say, spiritual anchoring. And that is something, because when everything is changing, as you just heard, you need something which is constant. And that constant can only come from, in my experience, and I may be wrong, like Buddha said, please don't believe what I say, please go and just check out for yourself. What works for you, please figure that out. So what worked for me was the spiritual anchoring, and I have gone through lots of ups and downs, but somehow this is one thing which sort of held on to me all through those periods. And if we saw ups and downs, I suspect your generation will see raised to the power of n of that, because you will go through lots of, you just now heard workplaces, workmates, and so on. Everything is changing. The whole understanding of work is different. So spiritual anchoring, you figure out what works for you. And with somebody like Anilji over there, I think you are one school which I'm sure gives huge emphasis. And I went to the site and looked at your curriculum. There is a very, very strong dose of that. Many of you will not appreciate the importance of that today, but you will eventually, over a period of time, respect that. And if you are truthful to that, it will stand by you all through your life. So this is something which definitely I'll talk of. Continuous learning is already spoken of. Journaling, not necessarily in terms of writing down everything that happened in my life, but just reflections of what you're going through. The biggest teacher is you yourself. Whilst you'll meet lots of teachers in life, I have met lots of them, they have shaped me who I am, but the biggest teacher is you yourself, and that teaching can only come when you spend time with yourself. Aloneness is not loneliness. Aloneness is something which will give you time to reflect and cull out from there what is it that is really making sense to you. So this is the second thing. My maximum learnings came from most difficult assignments. When I was thrown in waters which are absolutely untested, untried, without knowing the definition of SAP, I was put into the ERP implementation team. Without selling 1 liter of oil, I was made head of lubricants business. And these kind of situations sort of, gave me lot of sleepless nights. But I tell you, when I think in the beginning you asked me about the elevation to the board. When I was sitting in the board and I was chairman of companies, this experience is the one which stood by me and nothing else. This is something which is there. And technology is another area which you people cannot duck. So technology is an excellent servant and a terrible master. So one cannot, and sometimes I hear people fashionably say, oh, I don't understand IT, or I don't understand technology. I think that is not a choice. That's not an option. We have to be, it's a great slave, so you have to be a master all the time. If it's your master, your life is miserable. So that is one thing which this thing, and remain open, and most importantly, uh, trying to keep understand whenever you are doing different things, what is it that you are naturally inclined to do, what's God's own gift that you have got. And each one of us has a God's own gift. Each one is a part of the same, higher self. So there is certainly something for which we are all here. And if you more and more, when you try, test, and see what is working for you and what's not working for you, you will understand your own inclination, taste, and what are you naturally good at. Often somebody else holds a mirror and tells you, look, when you did this, I found you are brilliant. So keep looking for those kind of inputs also, because often we are blind to our own, Professor S.K. Chakravarti of IIM Calcutta used to always say, Kasturi Mrug. So people are looking all over the jungle, not knowing that that fragrance, that beautiful fragrance, is coming from your own navel. So we are often in that situation. So you search yourself and you'll find answers. So I somehow gave you a longish answer, but trust me, I believe in every word that I have said just now.
I adhere to a lot of points that you said, sir. Thank you so much for that explanation. Mr. Ganesh, what are your thoughts on it?
So, so on a lighter vein, when people refer to me as Sridhar G, I'm not sure whether the G stands for Ganesh, which is what I've converted into my surname, or is it the respectful G that is used in the North? So that was my first dilemma as I started this webinar. Now that I'm okay, because both of them can be used interchangeably. So coming, I think both RR and Srikanth have given you a wonderful list. I resonate with a lot of them, and I just add 2 or 3 things to it. One is humility. I think humbleness is very, very important. And this comes up. This is taught by Krishna to Arjuna in chapter 5 and verse 19. If I can just recite the first line, he says, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastini. So when he says Vinaya is humility. Well, however learned you are, you must always carry with you the sense of being humble. I think for an HR practitioner, that's very important. I think the second one to me is courage. I've had, as RR mentioned, I've had many adversarial situations. I think one has to be courageous. One has to decide on what is required for the business, as Srikanth mentioned. And so I think courage is very important in terms of where you are, and not be ducked or bowed down in terms of where you are. The third is being business aware. I think many of us in the profession or in the function tend to be extremely siloed in terms of looking at it from a functional point of view. I think Srikanth mentioned this as his first or second point. How are we integrated with the business? How much do we understand business? Do we know what constitutes the top line? What is the bottom line? What is EBITDA, etc., etc. I'm very passionate about this, and I think unless we come to the center of the business, HR will always find itself limited. And in the interest of time and other questions that may come, I would just restrict myself to one more, which is a sense of humor. I think we tend to take ourselves very seriously. I think even this webinar we could do with a few jokes, and we could be lighthearted, and I think things get better. And if the HR guy is all grim, how do you think the rest of the organization is going to respond? So I have always believed in having a smile, smile. My first question is, what did you have for breakfast today? And that imbalances people. So they say, wow, this is a guy who's asking me something about my upma and dosa and vada and idli, and not concerned about saying what are the highlights of your career, right? So I think that sense of humor is very, very important. And that, I think, is also about humility and lightness. So those are my 3 or 4, in addition to whatever my learned colleagues in this webinar have said. RR has said a few which are extremely important. So has Srikanth. So I'm just adding on to that sort of a long laundry list. All right. So I leave it there. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, sir. It was really nice to hear to all of those traits and characteristics that we expect from an HR leader going further. Anshika, over to you now.
Thank you, Kashika. So my question is for Ganesh sir. Sir, I want to know that how the future of learning and development has changed in the wake of COVID as compared to the previous time, and like how HR professionals can deal with that.
Wow, that's a very big question. I can take the next 2 hours on it.
If you could give a little brief for that.
All right. Okay. I think COVID has changed a lot. I think if you look at it from a learning, I'll just keep it to a few points, and I'm sure RR and Srikanth would like to add to what I have said, because they carry rich experiences on this themselves. They have seen the change from March 20 in terms of what has happened to the whole business of working, profession, etc. I think learning has moved in a way from in-person to digital, offline, and now to blended learning. So I think it has got to be very context specific in terms of what we offer. I think what we need to do also, I think this in the COVID context, is in-person interventions, because which bring out the social skills are extremely important, because digital somehow may not be able to do that, or choreograph courses which will also highlight that in terms of what participants can bring. So I think there are challenges in terms of learning. There are challenges for organization in terms of what technology to bring, how to make that technology as friendly as possible. And I think there are challenges for the L&D professional who has not been so technology savvy, if I may say so. HR has always shied away from 2 things. One is numbers, and the other is technology. And I think both of them need to be confronted. So I think the biggest impact is going to be on the L&D practitioner, and he needs to prove and demonstrate and show evidence that he's technologically aware in terms of where he is, and he's capable of leading this on a technology basis. So he can't say no to ChatGPT, for example, the current craze, right? So therefore, I think these are in very briefly some of the big challenges in terms of where we are. Individuals have become, from a learner point of view, the challenges are there's a lot more freedom today. You don't have to depend on the company's set of courses or programs. You can go out. You have a lot of freedom to do what you want to do, what you really want to pursue, right? It could be photography. It could be, how do I run the mile under 5 minutes? It could be digital technology. So that's a great freedom that technology is offering you today, which is not there when I used to work. It certainly was not there. And therefore, that's a great thing. So it offers flexibility, mobility, a lot of apps. You can do it. You can do it on your phone, right? I know there are greater number of views on Disney and Hotstar as compared to Coursera or somewhere else. But unfortunately, that balance perhaps has to change. So those are all, I think, in a way, the challenges of what has happened post-COVID. And I think they're all there to stay, because even onboarding and induction is happening digitally today. So therefore, how do we not bring learning onto a digital platform? Those would be my sort of initial comments in terms of where we are and challenges of post-COVID scenario. I'll hand over to RR and Srikanth for their comments. if that is what you are seeking.
Yes, sir. No problem, sir. Ara, sir, can continue.
Well, I think to build on what Sridhar said, it seems to me that it is not either or. It's a high tech and high touch. And I think my own experience during COVID time, learning platforms digitally which were created were very effective in the sense that you could reach out to a much larger number. And the cost of running such learning events could be brought down significantly because no travel and no accommodation involved. And there was also a greater level of self-accountability for learning. So I think as long as technology can enable effective platforms to learn and to share expertise and experience, I think that's something which is to be promoted and supported. It has arrived and it will flourish. But equally, high touch is equally important. Because I've also come across a lot of people who were saying that, look, I've got onboarded into this company, but I don't know who the hell is my boss. I have no bloody clue as to who my peers are. And I don't get, as Sumantha Ghoshal talked about, the smell of the place. I don't have a sense of the culture in which I'm operating. And therefore, I think some companies which have gone extremely on the high-tech side are now realizing, once disengagements are happening, infant mortality is going up, there is a realization that, look, we need to focus on the high touch as well. So I think it's not either or, but I think we have to take technology and human resources together in our journey.
Absolutely. Very well said.
Thank you, sir. So, Shrikant, sir, what's your view on the same?
I'll put it in 2 lines quickly. It only accelerated what was already happening. So if you saw that instead of a learner-based, learner-driven process was something which had already started, but it accelerated multiple times. And of course, some of the cottage industries like my own, where I used to sit next to a board member and work with him, got affected during the period. But we tried to have meetings, even board meetings and board presentations through the online processes. But there is nothing which is a replacement of sitting next to someone and learning from him. A presence of a guru itself is illuminating, so that cannot be replaced by the online sessions. So it should not be either or, as has been said earlier.
Sorry to interrupt
Thank you,
here,
sir.
but we may have to take a couple of questions from the chat box, which the participants have added. So we may have time for about 2 questions, and then we would request Anil sir to give us some concluding remarks. Over to you, Aradhya, if you could read a couple of interesting questions from the chat box. If we can't answer all, we can mail them and get those answers from the panelists. But if we could have a couple
Yes,
of...
ma'am. So there's a question in the chat box with the students asking, like, to Shrikant sir, that in your entire career, which is the one role that you learned the most and drew out your leadership talent?
I would slightly modulate the question to say, which is the role in which I got most challenged?
Yes.
That happened during the ERP implementation, which was most challenging because it had 3 distinct dimensions: people, process, and technology. Whilst I may have dabbled in the people dimension, technology was fairly new to me, and I had to really take a deep dive. And similarly, in the business processes, just think of every single thing that happens in our organization across the processes which runs through inside and outside the organization through multiple functions and role holders, getting to grip of that. And but in retrospect, when I was a board member, this came in extremely handy, because any proposal, presentation, board note, or whatever was being given, I could really go to the basics very quickly.
Thank you, sir.
If I can add on from my side, the biggest challenge has been weaving the mindsets of people in a merger and acquisition context. To weave two balance sheets is much more easier than weaving the mindsets of people if they are particularly drawn from two sets of companies who have been fighting in the marketplace as competitors. But it is like two brothers living in two different houses, now sharing one kitchen and one living room and two bedrooms. So how do you actually sort of bring about a cohesive, purposeful future post-merger? And I think that's the biggest challenge in terms of human resource management in a M&A context that I would call out.
We
Thank
will
you.
have to cut it short now. I'm so sorry. This is such an interesting and engaging session. I think we can just go on listening to these wonderful speakers who have come today as panelists with us. I would request Anil sir to share his views after the session has.
My role is not to speak at all about my views, but RR, I'm going to go against what Manjula said. There is a very important question for you. How can you be honest when you have to lay off people all of a sudden? You are asked to lay off large number of people in industry and you are the HR person. How can you be honest and upfront when you are being asked to do something which even you are not completely sure of as to where that is coming from?
I think there was a reference to tough-mindedness, because there is a perception that HR is all about softy and being nice. There are times and situations where you have to take tough calls.
True.
And I think if we were to really look at that, we are at the end of it supporting the business to accomplish its goals, but at the same time protecting the interest and the fairness and the equity of the people who are with us, then there are tough calls. And in the context of situations like that I have encountered, here are total 9 branches. Post-merger, from 9 people, you have to choose 4 because you only needed 4 branches. So the principles of meritocracy, the principles of transparency and openness with which the criteria are agreed, and there is a consensus at the board level, because you can't have multiple signals going out after a decision is taken. And how effectively you deal with the people who are involved, and therefore managing the aspirations of people on one hand, the 4 get selected, but how do you deal with the remaining 5? How many of them could be redeployed? How many of them could be repositioned? How many of them at the end of the day will have to actually be helped and supported to have an honorable movement outside of the organization? How fair and equitable are you in dealing with such challenges and situations? And I think that is a real tough and demanding sort of context where we have to be both tough and also both nice.
You know, I have observed all these 3 friends of mine in their actual work context. And I want to say what I observed with Sridhar when we were working with him in Cadbury's is that, and I distinctly remember this dinner where he had his MD and all his board members with him at his house. The respect that he had from all of them and the way he orchestrated collaboration and teamwork across boundaries was something that he did remarkably well, and therefore he was highly respected by his colleagues. The role of HR to bring people together, the convener of the team spirit and collaboration and making people aware, and the integrity with which he carried out his work was remarkable. And Shrikant, the way you understood the business, even though you were in HR because of your very unique background, I think the way you understood what it takes to run a refinery, what it takes to actually market your product in BPCL, I think the respect you had of people was quite special. And RR, the clarity of thinking right from the first day since I have known you, and I worked with you, both you and I serve on the Schneider board, and the way I have seen you with the clarity of thought, and you are very, very clear, and you earn the respect of people because your communication is absolutely clear. And that happens when you have an uncluttered mind. when you can simplify complex things. So these are some wonderful gifts that all our colleagues can learn from. And I can't thank you enough, from the bottom of my heart for giving us this privilege to host you this evening. And I'm sure our students, when they watch this YouTube video, that like others would do. And thank you, TV. You are being very generous. You wrote the book with Arvind, and you are attending these webinars. You are in the audience even today, applauding all these wonderful friends of ours. So thank you, TV, for doing that. And I look forward to our next webinar on 2nd February, the Thursday. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you,
Manjula, and my young friends. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone
sir.
for your
Thank you.
time. It was a wonderful session. Thank you so much. And I hope